Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it and give this video a like.
Podcast below in the description. Go check it out as well.
Video brought to you by our friends at wineaccess.com/ham. Get 20% off.
Yep. Wineaccess.com/ham. Send a gift today. 20% off on us. Wineaccess.com/ham.
Satisfaction guaranteed. One thing Peter King wrote about, John, is the trade with the Dolphins. The trade up to number 3 that the Niners made a lifetime ago. I remember where I was. Actually, I was on my way. I was about to leave for Napa when that trade happened on a Friday morning. If we look back at that video we made that day and my photos from Napa, I'm wearing the same shirt. So it was a celebratory weekend. But what did you take away from what Peter King wrote about that trade and ultimately how it went down for the Niners?
Well, I was fascinated that the original offer and was almost, I guess loosely agreed upon was 3 ones, pick 12 and 2 more ones. So a net of 2 first rounders. And then ultimately, as the process played out, that one thing that was big with the Dolphins, and it makes sense after watching the way they drafted, and clearly they knew going in, they were not going to draft an offensive lineman. They wanted an impact skill guy, I think is one thing Brian Flores mentioned. They wanted an impact skill guy. And you know what? This is where I give them credit. It turns out all the impact skill guys, Chase, Pitts, Waddle, Smith, all gone by 12. This is where we talk a lot. I talk a lot. I think it's the most important part of the draft. This is why you're reading this thing about Miami and just kind of following along. Now, the Tua thing will kind of make or break them. They're clearly pretty smart. Honestly, if Tua failed, I would still stick with those two. They missed on a quarterback, but I think those fucking guys know what they're doing, right? I agree. Listen to their logic. Listen to the guys they're picking. They got a good idea of what's happening, Guy.
They've done a lot to this point that we can judge on in terms of just how they value and what they value and whether they can play the market. Right now, the stocks they pick still have to hit, but they've shown that they've made 28 trades in 28 months, as Peter King wrote. The Ravens in that same span made 14 trades, so twice as many trades, and the Ravens make a lot of trades.
To me, there's nothing else that an organization can do a better job of. When you see a guy who's a franchise player and you go, we're not going to pay them, and then you flip them like they did with Tunzel. Now, they didn't draft him, but they flipped him because their whole thing was we didn't feel we were never going to pay him. Boom, they got rid of him, and that's clearly reaped a lot of benefits. But ultimately, they came back, and I'll never forget Parag told us this when we interviewed him a couple years ago. And you kind of laugh at it, but I do think that the more and more – I notice with things we do when trying to get other people involved when it comes to advertisers sometimes, you can't always be trying. You do have to meet people in the middle. The best deals you're going to make are ideally somewhat where they both feel win-win. And they had basically accepted the offer, or at least it was in pencil. And then they kind of came back. John Lynch has watched his daughter play tennis. I mean, if you told me what are the chances she's a Division I tennis player, I'd probably lean closer to 100 than I would 80%.
Well, John, he threw hard. I bet she serves pretty hard.
Yeah, I bet she's probably pretty good. That they said we need an extra 3. And then you and me were talking before we jumped on, there is precedent with a trade from 6 to 3, and ultimately that's what Miami was going to do because they knew they were going to come back to get to 6. 6 to 3 cost the Jets 3 years ago or 4 years ago now with Sam Darnold 3 second-round picks. And I'd say, would you rather have 3 second-round picks or 1 first-round pick? Because that's ultimately what Miami was going to get sitting there at 6. And I don't think it's that crazy. 3 seconds, yeah. 3 seconds or 1-1 because ultimately Miami had to get rid of one of the ones to get back from 12 to 6.
Yeah, I mean, right? And again, if you told the Jags, we'll give you 3 2s for your 1, it's always different when you start attaching players to it. But in the context of this, right, if the Niners were sitting at 6, let's reverse the trade. Let's say instead of trading from 12 to 3, the Niners traded with the Eagles to go from 12 to 6 and then made another jump to go from 12 to 3, right?
Yeah.
Let's say they'd done it that way. I don't think the cost would have been any cheaper because we know Miami had to give up a 1. And so ultimately Miami only got 1-1 to go. Not only. They got a 1, and then they added 3, the tennis 3 that he got from John Lynch to go from 3 to 6.
So I think the deal was fair. And here's where I give the Niners credit because I think sometimes when you make a historic trade, you get defensive. It's a natural reaction. when the media is going to ask because the fans now are saying it, and it's just like the media loves Twitter, and that's where everyone freaks out. You overpaid, and I think the moment you tell someone they overpay, and this works as an umbrella with a free agent, and it works definitely with draft trades. People are natural, like, no, we just thought this was the value, or we believed in this. The Niners came out and said, we overpaid, essentially. Like, we knew we had to pay ultimately a premium to trade up early, and we were comfortable with that. Because to me, their deal, they were very comfortable doing, we'll flip-flop you 12 and 3, and we'll give you 2 additional ones. To me, I'm sure that internally, like, that's a shitload. But ultimately, they're asking for a 3. It'd be like you buying the equivalent of this trade just with the 2 ones. Like, we'd use some of these housing analogies in like the hundreds of thousands. It'd probably be the equivalent of like buying a $5 million house, and then they come back and be like, it's actually $5,125,000. So 5.125. Are you really going to bitch and moan over 125,000 when you're spending $5 million? You could, and some people do. And I think sometimes in negotiation, ego and pride. But if you just look at the big picture, like, fuck it, like, we're already spending $5 million. Right? What's an extra $125,000? And ultimately, the way Kyle said it, or the way they justified, I guess, John telling Peter, is that we have the 3rd round pick from Robert Saleh, which I think you got to be careful with, because it's like, well, I won 7 hands of blackjack. Well, that is your money, like, that is your pick now.
And it's kind of a 4th round pick, but
yeah, because it's the end of the round, so that probably made it a little easier, right?
It definitely made it easier.
It's in the comp round.
Yeah, I think part of it too is just, it's not just how you feel about it, it's how you can present it, right? And you can present it as, look, we had 2 3s, we had to trade one of them, fine. I think the way you price the house makes a lot of sense based on that you had this other 3rd round pick. But again, I go back to how much cheaper would the deal have been if they had done it? And it's not just if they had done it on draft day, how much cheaper would it have been? Let's say it was cheaper draft day, which, again, I'm not convinced it would have been. But let's say it was. What are you paying that 3rd round pick then for? You're paying that 3rd round pick for the 3 weeks that you get to evaluate Trey Lance the way you would want to evaluate Trey Lance, right? Spend the time with Trey Lance that you want to spend with Trey Lance and with Mac Jones and with Justin Fields. Like, they didn't get nothing by doing that deal early. That's the other thing I think we have to look at. They got something. They did the deal early for 2 reasons, and we only focus on one of the reasons. The reason we focus on is they did the deal early so nobody else could do the deal. That's what we always, you did the deal 3 weeks early so no one else could have done that deal 2 weeks from now. But there's 2 reasons. The other reason is you paid for access to the prospects that you would not have felt comfortable fully accessing if you were still sitting there at 12 and letting everybody know what you were thinking, or at least giving people hints of what you were thinking. Like, they didn't get nothing by doing the deal early. So I look at that extra 3rd they had to pay. They didn't get nothing. Like, and what would have been worse? You hem and haw for 2 more weeks, and then you end up paying anyway, and now you lost 2 weeks of time. Like, if you had said throw in a 5th, you could have done the deal a month earlier. Hell, they might have done that, right? They didn't get nothing by doing it early.
And to me, if ultimately they paid a 3rd round pick to end up with Trey Lance and not Mac Jones, that's worth it alone.
Well, then there's that too.
Because if you told me that they wouldn't have the access to do all that stuff and still made the trade, maybe they do end up with Mac Jones that way. So I'd say the 3rd round pick to ensure Trey Lance, shit, I'll take it.
The other thing, don't you feel kind of good just reading that article if you're looking at it from a Niners perspective? That whole deal was a pretty high level deal. Like, the Dolphins aspect of it was high level. The Niners aspect of it had vision. The Eagles aspect of it had vision. Like, those are 3. I'll say this from afar. The Dolphins, I think, know what they're doing. Howie clearly, from a trade value standpoint, knows what he's doing. That whole thing came together maybe in part because it had 3 parts. From the Dolphins standpoint, it had 3 parts that all had a clear idea what they wanted to do. Like you said, what players they had targeted. Clearly, Miami had an idea what they wanted. I would imagine Philly had an idea what they wanted and didn't want. Philly wasn't about to draft a quarterback there.
I'll give you one. I think Philly has taken a little shit for using a 3rd round pick to go from 12 to 10 to get Devontae Smith.
Yeah.
And I think Howie would say this. We would have taken Devontae Smith or Waddle at 6 because obviously we wanted Pitts. We knew he wasn't going to be there. We were going to take a wide receiver, one of those 2 guys. We ended up getting one of those 2 guys, and we added a 1st round pick, right?
Yep.
So I think it worked out pretty well.
I would say in the retrospect, all 3 of those people in mind had a vision for who they wanted They got who they wanted, and in the Dolphins and Eagles case, they got a little extra before they got who they wanted.
But I think part of this is understanding the value. This is we've talked about the Raiders not getting it way before the draft. Like these guys were having these visions in the middle of March, right? This wasn't like a week before once you've had all the pro days.
I think March 3rd was when wasn't March 3rd when they started talking?
Yeah, and clearly then the Dolphins, once they started working with the Niners, started calling Howie, right? So all these deals were kind of getting worked on. You have to have part of being a GM is not just like, once a week before the draft, like I got an idea. You should have these fucking ideas in January and February. And then obviously the more information that comes in, but to me the best teams are so far ahead of the game on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Have an idea of who's going to get slotted where. It's like the price points on the players. Now, you might be a little off, but it felt like most of these guys, all three teams, had a pretty good idea, right?
It definitely does. It definitely did. March 3rd. We're open. We'll listen. That's what Chris Greer told John Lynch. Underrated part of a GM is how you are on the phone.
I do think part of it, too, is just you get better and better with relationships with guys. Like, you really kind of know the way they tick. There is probably, one pushback has always been that GMs are a little more sacred, like sacred cows than coaches. They get run through, and a lot of GMs it's harder for owners to get rid of them because it's kind of easy having them. You do just end up staying in that position a much longer than a coach, right? I bet if we just pulled up the last 10 years of the coaching picture, there is a ton of new faces. If we just did the GM picture, I would say that like 80% of the guys, even like the ball, like most of them are kind of the similar names, right?
Spend more time with the owner.
Just go around like the NFC West.
Yeah.
Snead, Keim, Schneider, Jerry, Spielman, Howie. Like you just go around the league. Gettleman's been a GM for the last decade.
Yeah, Jerry Jones been at it for a while.
This was one of the first years there were like 3 or 4 GM openings. For the most part, most guys stay just in their spot for a long time. Like Dimitrov had the job for 15 years.
Yeah, and some of these were simultaneous, right? Atlanta and Detroit were both at the same time.
You're saying when they blew? Oh, you're saying with the head coach.
I'm saying they hired both together. I guess sometimes that happens anyway, but
it's becoming a little rarer though. It's becoming like less. Felt like that used to happen. They were on the same timeline. Now a lot of GMs get like 2 or 3 coaching hires.
Yeah, who's got personnel power in Atlanta? The GM, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
he hired Arthur Blank.
Who?
The GM in Atlanta hired Arthur Blank. I'm not Arthur Blank. Sorry, Arthur Smith. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think Arthur Smith had so much juice. I'm not. That's a great question. I'm not super locked in with the hierarchy.
Detroit feels like the GM is in charge there. Hired Dan Campbell.
Well, Albert Breer wrote that it was kind of like a mutual hire. Like they were both just hired and they hadn't known each other. So I would imagine the GM has the personnel power on draft day and the coach has the power during the season. Yeah. Those are probably the deals in those 2 places.
Who else? Arizona could be.
Yeah, I guess the Jets, he's been there now for 2 years,
right.
The GM. Feels like Jacksonville got a new GM, right? I mean, Balky and a new coach.
Yeah, that's right.